I scare you? I sure hope I did, because today we're going to be talking about horror movies, and more specifically a horror movie I really want to make called SplitSight. But before we get into that, let's set the stage. Most horror movies feature an overpowered killer, a haunted location, and/or dumb survivors. But I want to make a horror movie where the sole victim and killer have the same weakness and strength, and it takes place inside their newly inherited 100% curse-free home. This is one of my favorite horror movie ideas that I've made, and I've had it for, probably a few years now. And today we'll be going over what the movie is, how it could work really well as take a brief little look into the potential futures of the film industry and the recent upsets like Obsession and Backrooms. The story goes that the main character is inheriting a property and assets from their recently deceased father. While looking through their belongings, they stumble across some documents, written letters, and unsent gifts to a woman the father was having an affair with. By connecting the dots, the main character finds out they have an identical twin who resides out of town. The twin brother, wanting to inherit everything for himself, decides to head over and kill the main character. As the main character continues living life, they begin having these bizarre, almost lucid dreams as if they were walking around the town at night. Eventually, the dreams see them getting closer and closer to where they live, until one night they dream that they're looking at themselves through a window and watching themselves sleep. They wake themselves up and see something moving outside of their window. The main character runs to check if the door is locked, but in their drowsiness they slowly blink, briefly seeing as if they were waiting outside the door. Hearing some shuffling outside, they look through but see nothing. Closing one of their eyes this time, they see through the closed eye as if they were waiting just beside the door. The main character quickly steps back, closing both of their eyes, seeing themselves running towards the side door. The main character forces their eyes open and bolting over to lock the side door just before whatever's hunting them can open it. Taking a quick breather, they close their eyes once again and see themselves breaking in through their bedroom window. Forcing their eyes open, they hear glass break and whatever is hunting them gets into the house. The rest of the movie is a cat and mouse game where the main character figures out that when they close their eyes, they can see whatever their twin brother is seeing. Whenever the twin brother closes their eyes, they can see what the main character sees. I won't spoil the ending, but it's a really cool sequence of action and showcasing how the supernatural bond works as the main character tries to escape death. But why would this work? There's more to be said about this, but I do think that people are kind of getting tired of, overpowered killer with a weapon, like Jason, who can sometimes teleport and have regeneration powers, Michael Myers, who gets fought by literally an entire town and sometimes burned alive and still lives, Chucky, who's died and revived more times than we can count, and the list goes on and on. And ironically, another big factor killing horror movies is the people dying in them. There are countless complaints of survivors being dumb or rolling the dice when they really don't need to. For viewers, it makes them feel unengaged because it's not realistic. Obviously, a killer doll or a zombie man isn't realistic either, but viewers love it when people act like people instead of pawns. We can see the trend of smart survivors in some of the best performing horror films of all time, with the likes of Saw featuring agents and desperate people escaping life or death traps, the scientists of Alien using their quick wit and engineering to survive an apex alien predator, the scientists of The Thing deducing who they can and can't trust while surviving against a shape-shifting alien. And it doesn't stop at smart survivors either. If we look at some of the best horror movies over the past 10 years, we can see a common theme in the form of supernatural effects. According to IMDb, 8 of the top 10 best performing horror movies since 2010 involve supernatural elements, so I think it's actually really reasonable to assume that people are really digging the supernatural. In fact, let's look at some horror movies that haven't been released yet and are actually going to be up and coming. According to IMDb, again, of the first 10 entries, a staggering 9 of them are about supernatural horror. However, one common theme across all of these entries is that the victims don't have the same benefits as the villains/killers. Obviously, it's a horror movie, so people should feel powerless to be scared, but I want to tap into the human part of the brain that says, I could do better. Even if the movie ends in a complete disaster, people still love looking back at these films to figure out the best way to live if this were to ever happen to them. This segues into a point about the potential future of the film industry with this type of content being extremely popular with channels like Kill Count, How to Beat, The Film Theorists, and many other channels that get tens of millions of views on these breakdown style videos. SplitSight directly targets this market because the only edge the villain has can be used by the victim as much as they want. The cool thing is that the villain is an identical twin of the main character, so when people analyze it, they'd be analyzing if they could fight themselves, which leads to some really cool discussions because people love talking about how they could floor a movie villain. And personally, I would also love to hear how people would fight themselves in this situation. And reinforcing this YouTube trend, with social media being a rising part of marketing for films, I think it's very realistic to try and appeal not just to a movie-going audience, but also to keep these breakdown channels in mind for free extra advertising. Obsession and Backrooms were released in May, with Iron Lung being released in January. The most common trait among all these movies is they were comically cheap compared to other Hollywood films, were made by YouTubers, made lots of cash, and didn't have a star-studded cast. In fact, all 3 of these movies together cost a total of $16 million. This is a drop in the bucket when you look at big-budget films that had a return of investment as scary as the genre we're talking about. Iron Lung had about a 10x ROI, Backrooms had about a 20x ROI, and Obsession had an astronomical 400x ROI, whereas Hollywood films released at the same time with star-studded casts and IPs struggled to hit north of 2x ROI. Aside from Devil Devil Wears Prada. Good job, guys. Another thing we should keep in mind is the Mandela Catalog by Alex Krister, which is being produced. Funnily enough, this actually came across my desk as I was writing the script for this video, and despite the original idea being produced by a YouTuber, Steven Spielberg, who is not a YouTuber, looks to be producing this idea for the big screen. Will Alex Krister have any involvement in the movie? I can't say, but I think it's safe to assume so. Regardless, it does fall into the YouTuber-inspired horror trend we were talking about earlier. It will be taking on a found footage style, much like the original videos on YouTube, and historically, these aren't the most expensive to produce, which reinforces the very cost-effective movie production we talked about earlier. This contributes to what I believe will be a growing trend in the film industry, which has actually already been seen before. In fact, the most recent example is Blumhouse Productions. A YouTuber by the name of Moist Critical has been saying it for years. Blumhouse produces slop on a low budget, and an ROI is almost guaranteed because they're so cheap. The same theory can be applied to these YouTuber movies, but the difference is that they're actually good films. The main point is that if a movie costs $1 million, it's much more likely to have an ROI than a movie that costs $10 million to make. In fact, we could see a parallel to this in the first Saw movie, which in 2004 was made for around $1.2 million, and in the first year made $100 million, and boasted an incredible 86x ROI. If we look back a little farther in cinema history, we can actually see a very similar story with Star Wars. While not really a horror movie, it had its first film made for $11 million in 1997, and went on to make an ungodly amount of money from multiple revenue streams. Obviously, Saw and Star Wars are movies made by Hollywood, but the writers were not in Hollywood, nor did they have any connections to speed up the funding. Saw was made by 2 college students in Australia, and George Lucas was a university film student. The important thing to note as well is that Obsession, Iron Lung, and Backrooms did not go through a major film producing studio, meaning they took home more money and more creativity to see the vision through. Who could have thought that creative freedom would make great art? While this trend is stunning, would you believe me if I said that movies are actually the last to adapt this trend in the entertainment field? We saw the exact same trend with music and games. Covering music first, there was a physical barrier in the form of CDs and cassette tapes that artists had to use in order to reach the market, which let producers take massive cuts on massive artists. In the advent of digital music and distribution like iTunes, Spotify, and many more, indie artists rose up extremely quickly and in some cases outclassed their record label-owned counterparts, with the likes of Taylor Swift, Chance the Rapper, and Frank Ocean coming to mind. Video games are much the same story, with a physical barrier being cartridges and companies having the cash to produce these at scale. With the advent of digital platforms and APIs, platforms like Steam and itch.io have let indie games shoot up and easily surpass triple and even quadruple A games. With new ideas, comparatively tiny budgets, and ridiculous ROIs, films are going to be following suit as Backrooms, Obsession, and Iron Lung are showing filmmakers they no longer need to go through production companies, as standalone tools like iPhones, cameras, home editing software, creativity, and hardcore dedication are able to make a blockbuster. SplitSight follows this trend we talked about earlier by being made by a YouTuber, which is me, could be made for less than a Hollywood movie, and I have never been featured in a blockbuster film before. I also have the same advantage of Saw and Star Wars because I'm a 2-time student. The sequence I showed earlier in the video was made with the website version of Clipchamp on my 5-year-old PC, filmed with a $250 Android phone, and took up a total of an hour to film. With the way SplitSight works, the movie could be filmed literally in any urban area with a large house. Even looking on Airbnb with one of the most expensive mansions in my area, it costs $2.8K for an entire week. Will SplitSight take that long to film inside the house? I assume not, but I can't say. Another cool funding opportunity is with brand placements. Because this takes place in a town at night, it's very easy to let brands pile in and have their businesses shown when the main character is moving about in their normal life, as well as during these dream sequences. And we all know how much brands love funding movies. As a little side tangent before we wrap up, I think there could be a really good marketing opportunity by creating a social media challenge where the floor plans of the house are released, as well as the contents inside the house, and people would explain how they could win against themselves in the house with the best submission, getting free tickets and a limited edition popcorn bucket at the theater. So all in all, I think SplitSight would be a really cool movie, not just as a fun thriller for people to see, but as something that can be analyzed and discussed online a bunch. It's easy to engage with, you don't need to know anything before watching, and in terms of business, the market seems really good for this kind of film right now, and I think it'd be super cheap to make. Anyway, I'm done talking for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.